Parsha Shemini. Last week we just touched on the Parsha a bit, but we spoke about Purim. And Parsha Shemini begins on 588 and 589. Okay, it begins, as most Parshas do, in a pretty unique manner, Vayikra B'yom Shemini, and it was on the 8th day. Kara Moshe Aaron, and Moshe calls Aaron Uvanav and to his children Leziknei Yisrael, and he calls the elders. And then he starts to discuss with Aaron various sacrifices that there was, and what Aaron is supposed to do with the different sacrifices. It's for the most part, this section is a carryover from last week and the week before, discussing the role of the Kohen and the various Kohanim in the Mishkan and later in the Beis HaMikdash, describing the sacrifices, how they're done, what the idea is. We touched on it before, but just in general, it's an important thing to note really what the idea of sacrifices are. And it's not, like that you're taking something worth money and you're wasting it. And you're saying, I love God so much that I'm going to waste this to show him, because there's no purpose in that. Like the ancient pagans, that they used to say, I love my child, and because I love my child, I'm prepared to kill my child for this God, so that the God will do what I want. Or I love, let's say, I have this woman, and she's never been with a man, and I'm going to kill her for the God, and it'll appease the gods. It'll make the gods happy, and the gods will do what we want. So if we kill this one person, then the gods will I'll make a living. Now, I'm saying this in a very simple manner. These weren't stupid people. They were confused, but they had these ideas. Those ideas are totally false. They're not, and they have nothing to do with our sacrifices. So when people tell you the sacrifices in the Torah, in the Bible, are bloodthirsty, and they're really very simplistic, and the people really don't understand what it's saying. And the idea, if you watch closely in this idea here, the idea of a sacrifice is that when a person does something wrong, the first thing that they're doing is that they're making a public declaration that they did it. Because you imagine you have to go and you have to bring a cow for a sacrifice. So you have to take this cow and lead it through the entire old city of Jerusalem to get to the Beis HaMikdash. So here you are, schlepping a cow through the city. Right? The people are going to notice. So here already you're making some type of statement that you did something wrong, and that you're going to fix it, or that you have a reason, maybe that something good happened to you, and you're going through the city. Whatever it is, you're drawing attention to yourself. And then you bring the sacrifice up, and the sacrifice is not just like burnt on the altar and totally destroyed. The idea of the sacrifice is that you eat the sacrifice, and the Kohen eats the sacrifice, and sometimes your friends or others will eat the sacrifice. And people say, well, how is a barbecue, basically that's what it is, how is that a religious act? And our point is that we feel that the use of the physical world is the best way of being spiritual. And the rest of the world doesn't agree. The rest of the world says, if you want to give a sacrifice to God, you take that cow and you burn it up. So there's nothing left but ashes. And we say, no, you take the cow and you offer it exactly as the Torah tells you, and then you eat it. And the eating of that, right, is a symbolic thing that it's entering into. It's becoming a part of you, and that you're now participating in this, and that's the spirituality that we believe in. Our whole idea of sacrifice is not throwing something away; it's bringing close. In Hebrew, a sacrifice is karbanot, sacrifices, from the word karev, to bring close. If you want to become close, right, this is a way of doing it. If you've done something wrong, you want to get close. Right? You have a disagreement with somebody, you do something that brings you close. Right? Same thing with God. If we've done something wrong, we become close. If we have responsibilities to God, that every day we have to offer certain sacrifices, the sacrifices bring us close. So there's all different types of sacrifices, and he goes through them all. Here, by the end of this section, we've got most of them. But then we have a whole new thing begins when we get here. If we go to 592 and 593, this section sort of ends, and now we begin an ancillary section, which is a section which has a relationship, but is not directly the same. In other words, it's not talking about sacrifices. Here it talks about the sons of Aaron, because of course Aaron is the head of the Kohanim, and all of his family are also Kohanim. So we're telling the whole section and the whole area of the Torah here is dealing with Kohanim. So the Kohanim have to give sacrifices, and suddenly It changes a little bit. It's talking about the Kohanim giving sacrifices, but it begins Vayikra b'nei Aaron, and the sons of Aaron, they took. Now, who were they? Nadav v'Avihu, ish machteu. Each one took a pan that they used to use. They would put fire in this pan in order to burn incense. It's part of the ritual that they did in the temple. It says Vayidnu behem eish v'yisimu le'katoris, and they put fire in this pan, and then they put spices on top of it, like incense, in order to burn. Vayikrivu l'fnei Hashem, and they drew close. They offered as a sacrifice. Remember the same word before God. Eish zara, a strange fire, asher lo tzivosam, which they are not commanded to do. So here we have our first problem with the Kohanim. Up until now, it only tells you what the Kohen does. So now we have a human face. They have Nadav and Avihu, two sons of Aaron, and they go and they offer a sacrifice that is not only a strange sacrifice, but they were not commanded to give it. In other words, everything else we've done, they're commanded. You have to do this sacrifice, that sacrifice. This one, they're not commanded. And because it was a strange sacrifice, so to speak, so the commentaries say that this was a very bad thing that they did, and they were actually killed for it. And we'll see when we read on. And they ask, really, what is it that they really did wrong, and what was behind it? So the various commentators, the various participants in the Gemara who use Medrash and these concepts to be able to answer questions, they tell us that there were a number of things that they did wrong. It could be any one of these things. One of them is they answered a question of Jewish law in front of their teacher, which is disrespectful. Another example of something they did was that they said, when are these old people, Moshe and Aaron, going to die and we can take over? So they were disrespectful to their teachers. Another one is that they were drunk. Yet they got drunk, and then they went and they did this. Any one of those, the Torah is telling you, are reasons that somebody would die. And then they went and they offered the sacrifice and they died for it. But those were the ideas behind it. So the commentaries try to explain the 2 different reasons. But the idea, just for our few moments, let's talk about the one where it says that they were drunk. What did they do? It says that they went and they got drunk. Why would they get drunk? These are Nadav and Avihu, who Aaron, his two sons, he names for his parents. So here he has these two sons who are extraordinary individuals. It was understood that these two sons would take over for Moshe and Aaron. They were of that caliber. They were extraordinary individuals raised on a very high spiritual level, themselves having a lot of potential and fulfilling their potential. And they got to a certain point where they said, this is as far as we're able to get. We can't go any further. In order for us to go further, we have to alter our state of mind. You hear this a lot from artists. In order, a person feels that if I'm living in reality, right? So I can go so far. I work hard, and this is what I can do. But if I alter my state of mind, if I take a drug, for instance, so that drug can help me see things differently, and I'll now be more creative, and I can do more. Right? You see this, like I said, with musicians, with artists. They get involved some of them will get involved with drugs, and their idea is, I'm more creative when I'm on the drug. You hear it back in the 70s from a lot of the musicians used to say this. And of course, in the end, when they looked back, they saw that it wasn't necessarily true. That the more they were on drugs, the more creative they were. Very often, the only one who thought they were more creative was they themselves, and that everyone else thought that they were just on drugs. And it didn't really do anything. But there was some idea. The point here was they felt they could go as far as they could go humanly possible. And now they wanted to go beyond. They wanted to go to the next level. So they felt that if they could use liquor to change their state of mind, to alter their mind, then they could go even further. They could go even higher, closer to God. So they felt by using an outside substance, it can assist us. And they did it, and of course we see that they were wrong, and they were killed for it. And the idea is that we need to realize that we have a potential. God gave each one of us potential, and we can fulfill our potential. In fact, we could work hard enough, so to speak, that one might even be able to go beyond that. We have examples in the Torah of such a thing, but certainly filling your potential is difficult enough, because they have to fulfill your potential. They felt that they could get to their highest point much easier by using an outside substance, by using a drug. And by doing that, we can be able to be even higher than we would have, and do so quickly. And we see that that's not correct, that a person can't do that. It might be possible under certain circumstances that a drug could help you, but it's not the way it's supposed to be. That is to say that whenever we work on trying to become close to God, or fulfilling the will of God, or becoming close to people, which is the will of God, we then have to realize that God gave us potential to do this, but it takes effort. You have to work on yourself. You have to discipline yourself. You have to become a better person. You have to become a more fulfilled person. And in doing that takes a lot of work. The natural way of doing that through effort is the way God wants us to do it. He does not want us to find shortcuts. Right? Today, when you have all of these people chasing Kabbalah, you have so many people that they have little tie to Jewish law and Jewish understanding, but they're following Kabbalah. Now, they go to various institutions that teach Kabbalah, and they believe that they're involved with it and they're close to it. And for the most part, it's rubbish. For the most part, it doesn't work that way. You can't be a person who has no involvement in Jewish life and think that you can use Kabbalah to live in a close relationship with God. A person has a close relationship with God by working on a close relationship with God. You have to work at it. It takes effort. It's not magic. It's not like, say, a magic potion and suddenly it happens. It's through our own efforts, our own work, that we accomplish this. And when people think that, I'll just go to this rabbi or this place that teaches Kabbalah and I'll learn Kabbalah and I have no involvement with Judaism, that I'll become close to God. And the fact is, it doesn't work. You might feel that. You might feel closer to God. You might have an emotional response that causes you to be closer to God, but you're not closer. In the long run, it's a facade. It's just an emotion, and it doesn't do anything. And these two were like that.
Excuse me, Rabbi. What it means, alien fire, with strange fire? What it means?
Means that they offered a sacrifice that was not commanded. It wasn't an appropriate thing. What they did. It actually tells us here. You find the actual expression of what they did, but the basic idea was that they offered a sacrifice that was not only not commanded, but it was wrong. Right? It's one thing is not commanded. I take a cow and I kill it in the way that God commands us to kill it, but He didn't command me to do it. He commanded you to do it, or He commanded me to do it on Tuesday. I'm doing it on Wednesday also. So He didn't command me to do it. That's why it says that there. But then it says a strange fire. A strange fire means that it was a form of worship that's not accepted. It's not our way of doing it. Right? So worshiping an idol is a strange god. That's what it's called. Strange fire is using a strange way, an unaccepted way of worshiping God. And that's what they did. According to the opinion, it says that they were drunk. That means that they were trying to use a foreign substance to raise their level so that they could become spiritually closer to God. But the virtue of the fact that they failed at that, and there was severe ramifications, shows you that they are not. That's not the way to do it. So we see in our own lives it's the same thing. There are no magic bullets. There is no mantra that you can get from a Kabbalah person that can make it so that you're going to have magic. Judaism and our relationship with God and our relationship with people is based on effort, on work, on effort, on following Jewish law. You can't accomplish it in any other way. And anything else is simply our imagination. And that's why He tells us this story here. So don't think that if you're at the highest possible level a human being can get, that now I'm going to go higher by using a foreign substance, by using a drug, by using liquor. That doesn't work. And that's what this tells us right here. So then it tells us that that they're killed. Right? It says that and a fire came out and consumes them, and then it says that Moshe goes to Aaron and he says, that God told him, I'll be sanctified from those who are nearest to me. And Moshe tells Aaron he thought that meant me and you, because God, right, who's the closest to God is Moshe and Aaron. But he says that now that it was your sons that were taken, I realize how great they were. But they made a mistake, right? And it says here, oddly enough, Aaron, who just lost two sons who were extraordinary people, whose Moshe tells him, God said that somebody was going to die, and I thought it was us, and we see it was them. His response is nothing. It says in Hebrew, "Vayidom Moshe Aaron." Aaron was silent. Aaron was silent. He had said nothing. Now, most commentaries tell us that this is actually a praise of Aaron. That Aaron here lost his two sons, who were extraordinary people, right? Who were as great or greater than Moshe and Aaron. That's what we just learned from this line. And yet they died sadly, because they did something wrong. And Aaron doesn't get angry at God, and Aaron doesn't yell out, and Aaron doesn't cry profusely. He's silent. In other words, he realizes that what happened was wrong. He didn't do anything wrong, but he's in pain because it's his sons. And yet he doesn't complain to God. He doesn't say, why does God do this to me? What bad thing could I have done that God did this? He doesn't do that. He understands that God has a plan, that there are reasons that things happen, and he doesn't do otherwise. So this idea that Aaron was silent meant that he didn't complain, he didn't rebel, he didn't fight against God. And this is considered an amazing thing for a person to lose 2 children. And because I do funerals and meet with people regularly, and you could have and I don't mean to be insensitive at all. We have to be sensitive to people in these cases. But you'll have like a 60-year-old guy who loses his mother, and he'll feel like an orphan. And like the guy's 60, you'd say, you're an adult, you're a grandfather. But the fact is, it doesn't matter. When to a parent, you're always a child. To you, your parent is always your parent, and you're still a child with them, no matter how old you are. When you lose your parents, you're an orphan. You feel like an orphan, and that feeling, right, that happens. People will always say to me, what did my mother do that was so bad that she has to die now? What did I do that my mother's taken away from me? And I'm looking to myself, I'm saying, this woman was 98 years old or 99 years old. You're 70 years old, right? What did you think she was going to live forever? No, of course I would never say such a thing. But the concept is that it's true. People are sensitive to this. People will get angry with God because of it, right? And it's a logical response. It's logical, but Aaron didn't do that, and that's why the Torah praises him. Yes?
Right. I mean, how many people do you see like that?
Like what? That complain?
Yeah.
Almost everybody.
What? Are you
Sure.
serious?
People, because it's part of the grieving process. It's normal.
No, like when they're 70 and they're...
Well, I mean, I haven't done that many funerals that I can say that I have enough people that have done a scientific study.
Lots done.
It's anybody who loses somebody is going to either say or think that they are angry with God.
But even if their parent is, elderly.
Sure, because nobody wants to feel that pain. Nobody wants to lose a parent. We know logically is one thing. This is not logic we're talking about emotion. It's a normal response. We as Jews are taught not to respond that way. Part of our idea is that we know that whatever God does is good. So most of the time we can see it, right? But sometimes when it happens to us, it becomes hard. Yes?
Why the punishment was so severe that they passed away, they were killed?
Because we have an idea that the greater someone is, the stricter God is with them. There's the idea of being a person, the higher level a person gets spiritually, so the more precise they're judged by God. And when they do something seriously wrong, that's considered an enormous thing. So while an average person might do something, they would have a punishment, but they're an average person. But when you have a person like Nadav and Avihu, who were extraordinary individuals, who are most likely the next leaders of the Jewish nation, do this, right? And they had such amazing potential. So then we're saying that God is going to judge them very, very strictly. And that's why that happened. The fact that they offered a sacrifice that was wrong is not a minor thing. It's a serious thing. Because it's one thing to make a mistake. It's another thing to knowledgeably go and do something wrong. Right? It's for instance, a Kohen, even if they offered a regular sacrifice, but if they were drunk, as that opinion says, you're not allowed to work in the Beis HaMikdash when you're drunk. Right? Just like you're not allowed to pray when you're drunk. It's an altered state of mind, which is a negative. So therefore, these are all reasons that these types of things would happen. Because of who they were, is much worse. It's the same thing here. If you have a board of directors, and on your board of directors you got all kinds of people, and a couple of them are accountants, and that board of directors of some charity, nonprofit organization does something wrong. Knowingly, not knowingly, they do something wrong. They don't pay their withholding tax 1 month, 5 months, right? And now the government says, okay, you guys are in trouble now. So they'll go to the board and they'll tell the board, listen, your director didn't pay the taxes, you got to pay the taxes, and that's the law. Right? If you're on the board, you're ultimately responsible. But if a person on that board is an accountant, they're even held more responsible because they have the training and knowledge to know better, and they know that they have to be on top of it, more so than a garage mechanic who might be on the board, right? It doesn't mean that the garage mechanic is stupid. It means that he's not trained in that area. And therefore, somebody who has a greater knowledge and a greater understanding in a certain area is held more accountable. It's the same thing here. Nadav and Avihu were the sons of Aaron. They were raised as Kohanim. Their life was based on being Kohanim. For them to go and get drunk and to go into the Mishkan and to offer a sacrifice, which they were not supposed to give, is a serious issue. And that's why they were killed.
Thank you.
Right? Now this comes up a few times. You're going to find later a whole parsha called Achrei Moshe Bnei Aaron, after the death of two sons of Aaron, and they talk more at length about this idea. But a number of things come out of here. For instance, here where it talks, it starts talking here about.
Sorry, Rabbi, you said
Yeah.
there's a later chapter and they're discussing more about the two sons?
Yeah, it mentions them again. And there's a
like
parsha named them.
Or what exactly?
It just tells you after the death of the two sons of Aaron, and then a few things that go on at that time, and it brings up the story again.
Yeah.
But so here, if we go on the next page, we find an interesting thing, which is it begins the next chapter with verse 12. It says, "Vayedaber Moshe al Aaron." Moshe spoke to Aaron and to Elazar and to Tamar, his remaining sons. It says that Moshe spoke to Aaron, and he spoke to Elazar and to Tamar. Aaron had 4 sons. 2 of them are dead. He's got 2 more, Elazar and Tamar. Right? So now Moshe goes to Aaron and he speaks to Aaron and his 2 sons. But he doesn't just call them his 2 sons. It calls them Hanosarim, which means the ones who are left behind. In other words, 2 were killed and there's 2 who left behind. Right? But it's a funny way of saying it. Like you say, 2 were killed. So you say he spoke to 2 sons. You can't speak to 2 sons who are dead. So of course he's talking to the 2 sons who are alive. So this word left behind, it's sort of like it's the same word you'd use for a survivor. Right? You have the 2 sons who were killed, and you have the 2 sons who survived. Right? And it's not dissimilar from the concept that we have in the Holocaust, where you have people who went through the Holocaust are survivors. They went through it, they lived, they survived. They're not survivors for a month, right? They're survivors for the rest of their life. Right? You can go into a building, and that building can catch on fire, and you can leave the building, and you're a survivor of the fire. And after a month or so, nobody thinks about it. But as a Holocaust survivor, it's a survivor for the rest of their life. But, however, we have a mistake. Those of us who were fortunate enough, I wasn't alive then, but like my father was born in America. My mother was born in Europe, but many people were born in America. The Holocaust wasn't a threat to them, a day-to-day threat, like it was to the European Jews who were being hunted, right? Here the Jews were living relatively free with some anti-Semitism and some problems, but they were relatively safe. They had the government was not against them in Canada and the United States. So therefore they were there. But it's really for the grace of God that they weren't in Europe, and because most of their parents had been in Europe and they came earlier. So they were fortunate that they weren't there. And in a sense they're also survivors. Now they're survivors in that they didn't die in the Holocaust. They didn't go through the experience. They weren't in the camps. They didn't have to run and hide and go with the partisans and everything. But they are also survivors. Like my father, who never didn't go to Europe, right? Certainly wasn't from Europe, is also a survivor. Because we as Jews understand that when the Jewish people are under attack, we're all under attack. Not just the Jews in that city, all of the Jews. Right? And so when the Jews in Europe were under attack for the Holocaust, and they were going to be killed, and 6 million were killed, the Jews that existed in other parts of the world that were relatively free felt the pain. Right? Not necessarily the same, but they certainly felt it, and they were bothered by it. And therefore they also are survivors. And it's an important thing to understand that this concept of survivor that people talk about, meaning a Holocaust person who experienced Holocaust and lived, is true. But on another level, there's also the fact that all Jews are survivors. All the Jews who were alive, who did not get killed at that time, are survivors. And we learned a couple weeks ago, we talked about Moshe's name. Right, that Moshe's name, he was called Moshe by the daughter of Pharaoh, who saved his life. And she called him Moshe because I took him out of the water. right? I mean, that's what the name means. I took him out. Now, really, that's not what the name means. Really, if you look at the grammar, it means he who took others out rather than he who was taken out. And that's because we understand that while Moshe's name is Moshe, and he's always to remember in his life that he was saved, right? He was also a survivor, that saved by a woman who didn't allow him to drown, and therefore he carries a certain responsibility with him. He carries with him the responsibility to help others. He was helped, and because he was helped and he's alive, he has a responsibility to help others. He feels this within him. That's how a person should be. You should feel that indebtedness because somebody went out of their way and saved you. Now you should go out of your way to save others. So that's why when we refer to him by the name Moshe, we don't necessarily mean the one who was saved from the water. It means the one who was saved from the water who understood that he has to save others. And that's what he did, of course. He did that. But we have the same thing here. Now, while we say that there's the ones who went through the Holocaust, they really did go through the Holocaust. They're only alive for some extraneous reason, because if something had happened which was expected to happen, they would be dead in Auschwitz, and they weren't, so they survived. But as I said, we also are survivors in that this didn't happen to us. And so too, just like they who survived have a responsibility to help others survive, so too we, because we're also survivors. And that's what these words are saying here. When it calls Moshe Aaron, calls to these two sons who are the survivors, they weren't killed. It's telling you that these two bear a responsibility to carry on and to repair what happened and to become great. Because of what happened, they survived it. They didn't die. And we too survived the Holocaust. We didn't die. And we also have a responsibility to help others in the same way. That's one of the messages that tells us. Now, then it goes back into discussing the various sacrifices and what they're for and why we do it. But then shortly, beginning on the bottom of 596 and 597, we stop talking about sacrifices, but since we're talking about animals, the Torah continues to talk about animals. We start talking about the laws of kosher. And here we have, beginning in chapter 11, Hashem speaks to Moshe and Aaron. He says, speak to the children of Israel, tell them, these are the creatures that you may eat, right? From all of the ones in the world. You can eat this one. It has to have a split hoof. It has to chew its cud, right? And then it goes through all different examples of animals that have split hoofs, right? That are kosher, ones that are not kosher, and it gives you whole examples from this. There's a couple of very interesting points here. Is that the first thing is when the Torah talks about what is the definition of kosher and what's not, it tells you that a kosher animal, a large animal, has to have a split hoof. That means if you look at its foot, it has to have more than one piece to it, right? Not just one like hard piece that it runs on. Right? It has to have multiple pieces. Like if you look at a deer has two, right? It has to have that. And it has to chew its cud. Chewing its cud means that animals have multiple stomachs, not like we do. We have one stomach. And we have, within our ability to eat, we have all types of fluids and we have our intestines, which makes it possible for us to digest food and to separate the nutrients from the waste. But an animal does the same idea by having multiple stomachs. It eats something, and that stomach that it eats it in has a certain amount of stomach acid, and it starts to digest the food. And then the animal will basically throw up. It regurgitates the food, it goes back into its mouth, and it swallows it again. When it swallows it again, it's now smaller, because it's already started to become dissolved, and it would go to another stomach. And it continues to do that until it's gone through all of the stomachs, and then he swallows, it's gone. That instead of having, like we do, where we have intestines that absorb it, they use the stomachs to do so through the chewing. The fact that an animal sort of throws up a bit and within its mouth, chews it some more, and then swallows it again, that's called chewing its cud. So when you see a cow chewing all the time, that's what it's doing, because that's how it digests its food. If you see an animal that doesn't chew its cud, like a horse, then it has a different process of digesting its food. So the Torah is telling us that animals that have a split hoof and chew their cud, those are kosher. Other ones that are either have a split hoof and do not chew its cud are not kosher. It can chew its cud and not have a split hoof, and that's not kosher, or it has neither, and that's not kosher. That's in the area of large animals, and it'll discuss the other one shortly. But in doing that, it describes to us what the Rambam says is a mitzvah to understand what constitutes a kosher animal. So a kosher animal has to have a split hoof and it has to chew its cud. Now that's a fact of the basis of what makes that animal kosher, so that now you can begin the process of slaughtering it appropriately and making it kosher to eat. But it's a kosher animal. There's a potential for that from the animal. But when you see in the Torah, and it starts talking about the different animals, it talks about the one that has a split hoof, but it doesn't chew its cud, and then one that chews its cud, but doesn't have a split hoof. Okay, those are ones that are sort of like half kosher. They're not kosher at all, but they have one of the two signs, right? A pig, right, which is considered one of the most significant unkosher animals to us, it has a split hoof, but does not chew its cud. Right, so it gives an example. The Talmud says that the pig holds out its foot to you, so you see, I'm kosher, you can eat me, but it's not kosher because it doesn't chew its cud. Right, it's a symbolic idea. So the point is that when it talks about it here, it talks about the different types of animals, like a rabbit, and that are not kosher because they have they may chew their cud and they don't have a split hoof. So it's interesting enough, if the Torah wants to be succinct, which it does, it wants to use the least possible number of words. If you have an animal that's not kosher because it doesn't have a split hoof, but it chews its cud, so you say this animal is not kosher because it doesn't have a split hoof. But the Torah instead says these are the animals that are not considered kosher, and then it says it does chew its cud, but it doesn't have a split hoof. So those are a lot of extra words. It could just say it doesn't have a split hoof, period. And if it doesn't have a split hoof, then it could chew its cud and not chew its cud. It doesn't make a difference. It's not kosher. Right, so why does the Torah have to tell you first what it does that complies with the law, which is it chews its cud, and then it tells you what it does to not comply with the law, why it's not kosher? Let's just be succinct like the rest of the Torah and say this animal, right, chews its cud, right? No, excuse me. This animal doesn't have split hoofs. He's not kosher. Period. End of the story. So the point is, the Torah is telling us an interesting message that has nothing to do with kosher, and that message is that it's trying to tell you the good within things. In other words, when it talks about the animal, it doesn't say the animal is not kosher. Right? It says right, which would be the simplest way. Right? It say the animal's treif. Right? That's a very simple way of saying it's not kosher. Instead, it's not. It says this animal is not tahor. It adds words so that it says it in a way where it's a double negative, rather than saying it's not kosher. It says it in a way that you have to think about it. It also tells you first the sign that makes it kosher, and then secondly tells you why it's not kosher. And if its whole purpose is to tell you that it's not kosher, then just tell me the part that's not kosher. So it's telling you that an interesting point, which is that the Torah wants to speak positively. It wants to speak good. It doesn't want to say negative things. There are times when it has to, but in general it wants to speak positive. It wants to see the good in everything. It's just like us. I mean, now this is sort of, this is a homiletic. It's not a literal understanding of the Torah is saying, but it teaches us an ethical message, which is when you're dealing with another person, right, usually, we have a mitzvah that says you should love the other person like you love yourself, right? Love your neighbor like yourself. So you say, well, that means that, if I like ice cream, my neighbor will like ice cream and give him ice cream. What it's really saying is love your neighbor like yourself is that when you do something wrong, when it's too hard for you to get up in the morning, when you get lazy, when you cut corners, when you get upset, anything like that we all do. Right? We understand. I say, you know what? I had a bad day. I got upset. I understand about myself why I'm doing something. I give myself an out. I say, you know what? I had a bad day. Or what am I supposed to do? This is too hard. Right? I always can come up with a way to rationalize my own actions. Right? We are like that. We can do that. So the Torah is saying that treat your neighbor like yourself. When you see your neighbor do something wrong, also find a way to rationalize his actions so that it appears he's not a bad person. He just did something wrong. But you can excuse him like you excuse yourself. If you excuse yourself, you can excuse him. Same thing. So why not? Why is it that you only excuse yourself and not him? Right. So the Torah is saying the same idea. The Torah is saying when you look at something else or someone else, look for the good. Oh, it chews its cud? That's fine. Does it have a split hoof? No, it doesn't. So, all right, so it's not kosher, but it chews its cud. Right? It doesn't make a difference in the law of kosher. But it's like you're telling me, is that person observant? Well, they don't keep Shabbat, but they keep kosher. Well, there's certainly some misunderstanding, right? Because they're not doing it, but you say, all right, but they keep kosher is a good thing. So I'm going to speak about the positive. I'm going to find the goodness in every person. Every person does good things. Like people sometimes will say to me, when you come and talk to us about Judaism, you make an error. It's either you're doing it or you're not doing it. Either you're keeping kosher or you're not keeping kosher. You tell me you keep kosher out, at home, but not out. My house is kosher, but I eat in unkosher restaurants. So they're embarrassed to tell me this. Now, of course, it's not logical. It doesn't make sense. The Torah doesn't command your house to be kosher. It commands you to be kosher. So wherever you are, you have to be kosher. But when someone says this to me, is it because they have a presumption that either that I expect that either they're religious or they're not religious. Not like you keep kosher at home, you don't keep kosher in the restaurant. Like they're embarrassed to tell me this. But the fact is, that we justify it. We don't justify that. But we have to understand that every good thing a person does is a good thing. Every mitzvah that a person does is a good thing. So every time you eat kosher food is a good thing. And if you don't eat kosher food all the time, you're still doing a good thing when you eat it. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that that's the way to do things. No, it's not. You really should do things correctly. But don't think that a person who let's say doesn't keep Shabbat, but they make Kiddush on Friday night, that their Kiddush is useless. It's not useless. It's a mitzvah. It's a positive thing. It's a good thing that they did. It's worse if they wouldn't keep Shabbos and they also don't make Kiddush. It's worse that if they don't eat kosher, right? And they never eat kosher. But if they don't eat kosher, but 30% of the times they keep kosher, so that's a good thing. You always have to look for the goodness, because if you don't, you only do it to yourself. I myself, let's say by mistake I did something I shouldn't do. A guy goes and eats unkosher food. He's so hungry and he's upset and he buys a meal that's not kosher and he eats it. And now he feels terrible, but he says, well, what do you want from me? I didn't have enough money, and I had a terrible day, and I was so hungry, and I've always wanted to eat this. Right? That's wrong. You rationalize it, but it's wrong. So when you rationalize it about yourself, what I'm telling you is the Torah is telling us here, you have to rationalize about others. In fact, it's less dangerous to rationalize about others. To say that others, I'm sure something happened. They're not mean. They just have a little sickness. They didn't. They didn't, like, let's say you invite somebody to a wedding and they don't come to the wedding after they said they would come. Right? So now you spent all that money and they didn't even come. So you'd say, you get upset. But, they don't even take the time to call me. But the fact is that maybe something happened. Maybe they were on their way and they had a car accident. Maybe they wanted to come and something else happened. Right? And why don't we think that? That's what the Torah is telling us. That's how you're supposed to think. You're supposed to always think, just like you yourself, how can I go to this wedding tonight? I'm just so tired. I was up so late last night and we lost an hour in the clocks and I've been working all day. I can't go. Right? But that's because I'm always rationalizing for myself. So now when it's you who doesn't come, I should rationalize for you. I do the same. That's what the Torah is telling us. Yes?
I want to go back too far, and I think we've had this discussion before, but if you're with an office and everybody in the office voted to go out to eat at a certain restaurant, part of the office, you have to go, and it's not a kosher restaurant. I've been in that situation many times.
Well, it's a different question.
Because you say,
because now you're asking, is that okay or not okay? The fact is, if somebody did it, and they came to me, right, and they said, I went to an unkosher restaurant, but do you usually eat kosher? Yeah. So it doesn't mean that all of the times they kept kosher are worthless. Right, that's the point here. So there, you're saying that you have a situation where you have peer pressure and your employer's pressure to go to an unkosher restaurant. They're not going to make you eat, but they want you to come. So that's a question that has to be dealt with on an individual basis. You can't make a general rule because either each person's different, neighborhoods are different, situations are different, employers are different, and everything has to be discussed in order to understand what's the best thing to do. Because black and white, you shouldn't go into an unkosher restaurant because you're basically sending two messages. One, that I don't keep kosher. Right? Two, that this restaurant's kosher. Right? Either way, the person watching it from the outside is going to get the wrong idea. You do keep kosher. You're just going in there because you have to, and this restaurant is not kosher. But people reasonably would get the wrong idea because they're going to think the opposite. That's really the idea behind it.
But I thought you
Yeah.
said you shouldn't think the opposite. So maybe you would think, she's just going in,
But they,
she has
but
to- she
When you
has
have a
water.
meeting.
But here's
have
a
a meeting
rule.
and you're going
The
to
rule
restaurant,
is
that's it.
you have to take care of you. Right? You got to take care of you. In other words, you are responsible that when you see someone else, you shouldn't think the worst of them. So if you see somebody walking into an unkosher restaurant, you should think the best of that person. Okay? But you can't tell me, but they got to do that. But they're not doing it. The world doesn't do that. The world thinks negatively. And therefore, Jewish law says we have to take that into account. We have to act in a way that's not only right, it has to be right, but it has to look right. Now, I'm not saying, be careful of this, I'm not saying that you have to do things that look right. I'm saying you have to do what is right, and it has to look right. There is, to the letter of the law, to walk into Tim Hortons and to buy a can of Coke, you're not doing anything unkosher, right? The can of Coke is the same can of Coke. If you buy it at a kosher grocery store, you buy it at Tim Hortons. It's a closed can with Coke inside. But to go into, right, so therefore you're not literally doing something wrong. But if you go into a place where the norm is, I'm going into here to buy food, right? Why do you go into the pickle barrel? You go to the pickle barrel to buy food. You don't go to the pickle barrel to look out the window. You don't go there to buy a can of Coke. You go there to eat lunch. Okay? So therefore, it's a reasonable presumption that if a Jewish person goes in there, they're going to eat there. Right? Otherwise, why are you going? Certainly, there's lots of reasons, like a meeting, like something from your work, like the work all got together and this woman got married, and they want to make a party for her, and that's where the party is, and you feel obligated to go. So while we have to deal with it on a particular basis, it's not unreasonable for someone to see you walking into an unkosher restaurant for a party to think you're going to eat there, or to think that the restaurant's kosher. So therefore, the Torah says you have to be careful. We have an obligation to not only do what's right, but to do it in a way that looks right. Those are two obligations that we have. We have the same obligation as we see somebody else do something that is definitely wrong, to tell them. But something that appears to be wrong, we presume that they're not doing something wrong. The fact is that most people don't do it. That's what you're saying. But I can't go and say what you hear all the time is, I don't care what other people think. I'm doing what I think is right. But you have to care. The Torah obligates you to care. Because otherwise you can do what you think is right, and you could be an embarrassment to the Jews because everybody else thinks you're wrong, because you're doing it in a way that doesn't look right. So we have to always take that into account. Doesn't mean you can't do anything. Doesn't mean you can't drive on Wednesday because maybe someone thinks it's Shabbos, right? Some guy thinks today's Saturday and it's really Wednesday, right? You don't have to worry about that. But there are reasonable things. It is reasonable to think that if a person is going into a bar, that they're buying a drink. It's reasonable to think that they're going into a bookstore to buy a book. And it's reasonable to think if you're going to a restaurant, you're going to buy food. That's reasonable. And therefore, we have to be careful. That's the idea. The Torah is saying, I'm responsible to judge you favorably. And certainly, I expect that you're going to judge me favorably. But I can't count on it. I have to act in a way that appears that that's not the case. Okay?
I think the sad part is I think a lot of people, in the outside world, can act, honorably, in front of other people, and they don't.
That's how the whole world is. Everyone's like that. You never have a divorce. You never have divorces. You never have people beating their wives or children, because no one does that in public. Right? That's how the whole world is.
But people go around and say, "Oh, that's such a good person, this person, But,
And to the best of your knowledge, they are.
They should just act the way they are. They should act real. Don't you think?
They shouldn't.
They shouldn't.
They at least that person is acting correctly in public, because we all know people who also embarrass their wives in public and embarrass their husbands in public, and that's worse than only doing it in private. Now, only doing it in private is bad. I'm not justifying it. But every positive thing you do is a positive thing. Every meal, if you have one meal your whole life that's kosher, you have one mitzvah.
Well, let's say you saw a husband, embarrassing your wife in public, and you know, then you'd say, I understand this, what this woman's going through or something, like, look, you know,
Right.
don't you think you would understand people better, or you say you should be empathetic? Like,
Right, but you're looking at the wrong side of the equation. Look at the man. The man embarrasses his wife in public, right?
Yeah.
So the man did something wrong. Now, for the case that we're discussing, we're presuming that it is wrong. Okay? We're not going to have to argue the facts. It's wrong.
Yeah.
So, what your job is to try to find the goodness in that man and to say he had a bad day. There's something wrong with him. There's something wrong. This happened or that happened. That doesn't justify it, and it doesn't mean you should just let him get away with it. You might, depending on the situation, have to go over to that man and tell him what you did is wrong, or to stop him. Sure, well, depending on your situation, you have an obligation
no, but
to help other
the
Jews.
Torah says you're supposed to tell a person.
If you believe that what you say is going to help that person, then you have to do it. For one Jew to another is obligated to tell another Jew that they're doing something wrong. If I see a Jewish person walking into a non-kosher restaurant, and I really believe that if I tell them that they shouldn't be eating in here, that they won't, then I have to tell them. I don't believe that was the case most of the time. If I don't know somebody, I don't have a relationship with that person, they don't know that I care about them, then all I will do is make them angry by going over, standing in front of the picker barrel on the promenade and stopping every Jew that walks in. They'll just think I'm crazy, right? But if I see somebody that I care about, that I know, that I think it wants to be observant, is trying to be observant, and they're failing at this moment, and they see me, they'll stop, right? Just by seeing me, they won't do it because they don't want to get caught, right? So if I say something to them with understanding, in a kind way, in private, letting them know I care about them, so then they might listen. So then I have to do it.
So if you see the husband, like, you know, insulting the wife more, like, several times, then you can assume that he's not a nice
You
man.
can still assume
Right.
that he's mentally ill. You can assume that he's a difficult person. You can assume lots of things before you have to think that he's just plain bad. But that doesn't make a difference about your responsibility to help. Even if this person doesn't realize what he's doing is bad, right? Whatever reason that is, he's ill, or he's having a bad day, he's only thinking about himself, or he's foolish, whatever the reason is, and he's embarrassing her, right? So it doesn't mean that just because you can find a way to see the good in that person and not necessarily think badly about him, doesn't mean you don't have to try to stop him from doing it. That's two separate things.
Would she, for example, go up and talk to him privately or whatever and say, you know what, I've heard you embarrass your wife. It doesn't look nice, it's not the right thing to do.
If you believe that you'd have some positive influence, then you have to do it. Right? Unless, but that's only, of course, in the case where all you're doing is it's afterwards. But if somebody is like hurting somebody else, then it makes no difference if you believe that they'll stop because you say so. There you are obligated to stop them, so they shouldn't hurt the person. That's different. But we were talking about after the case. He embarrassed his wife and it's over with. Now he's, and he does it again, and then in another hour goes by and does it again. And so now you want to say something, so he should stop doing it. Right? But that's different than if he's actually hitting his wife right in front of you, and then you can reach out with your hand and stop him from doing it. It makes no difference if he'll listen to you or not. You got to try. And so there's different understandings. But that's the concept here, is we're supposed to look at the goodness in people. It doesn't mean that we have to be blind and stupid. It means that even people who do things wrong are good, could be good people, and even people who don't keep kosher 99% of the time are still keeping kosher 1% of the time, and that's a positive. That's not enough, but that's a positive. So when someone says to me, I keep kosher at home, I don't keep kosher when I go out, and this is a person who's growing and who's coming and he's trying to change and trying to do things, I tell them, every time you eat kosher is a good thing. The fact that you don't do it all the time is not the best way, but that doesn't mean that when you keep kosher that you're not keeping kosher. It means you are.
And there was an article in one of the flyers, and I kept it. It's really cute, and the title was "Please Be a Hypocrite." It's just like saying what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
That people feel they're a hypocrite, but I think he says.
Right. The idea of being a hypocrite is a anti-philosophic idea. That is to say, there are no philosophers in the world who give any credence to the idea of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is a destructive force. In other words, for me to say, I can't do that, I'll be a hypocrite, or you're a hypocrite, there is no positive purpose for saying such a thing or believing such a thing. Because look at this. If I say, my doctor told me I got to lose 20 pounds, I've got to start eating good. Okay? So I start eating well all the time, but I eat a donut. Does that mean I didn't eat well? It means I did one thing wrong. Right? I did all these other things. So and now what happens is I say, you know what? I ate that donut. I'm a hypocrite. So I'll just stop eating well. I'll just eat donuts, because that way no one will say I'm a hypocrite. But that's not how it works. Whenever you want to change, it's done in little steps, and you improve yourself slowly, and you will fail, and you'll take steps back, and you'll take steps forward. But nobody changes overnight. And therefore, if you're afraid of being called a hypocrite, all that will do is stop you from changing at all. Because nothing you do can you do 100%. If you decide, your doctor says if you don't exercise every day, you're gonna die 10 years younger. You have to do it. I know your genetics. You have to do it. And you exercise 4 days a week. And that's 7. So are you a hypocrite? Because those other 3 days you slept late? Yeah, you're a hypocrite. Right? You tell people how important it is to work out, and you're working out, and your doctor told you to work out, and you tell everyone, I'm going to work out now, and I'm going to get healthy, and you go out and you eat donuts. But all that does is it doesn't stop you from eating donuts. It stops you from working out. So the idea of being a hypocrite is an anti-philosophic thing. It is the most anti-motivating concept that there is, and it's something that nobody should even take into account, because it's totally destructive. Right? Somebody who gets up and tells you you have to keep kosher all the time, and they don't keep kosher all the time, right? That's not a smart thing to do. But if you say to that person you're a hypocrite, all it means is they'll stop keeping kosher sometime. They won't keep kosher at all. Then they won't be a hypocrite. Now, what good is that? They just became worse, not better, because of what you did. Because nobody becomes better because of that.
I heard, excuse me, Rabbi, I heard one rabbi's opinion that Jews not supposed to keep pets, it means cats or dogs, because we are contaminated.
What?
Pets and cats and dogs. We're not supposed to
Oh, you shouldn't have cats or dogs. Why?
In your home, because they're unkosher and we're going to be contaminated even for touching them. It means that Jews not supposed to have the pets.
Because what will it do by you touching a cat or dog? You contaminate you?
Yourself,
How?
because you're
Yourself.
touching them and they're unkosher. You become
You're touching
unkosher.
unkosher stuff.
Well, kosher has to do with eating, right? And you're not eating them. I've heard this. This is a custom by some Jews. It's not a law. The idea being that they believe that you show children unkosher animals like Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse. So Donald Duck's kosher, Mickey Mouse is not kosher. There's something to it, but it's not a law, because kosher is what you eat. Right? Kosher isn't what you have. So it doesn't mean that you can do anything. There are certain things that we can't do. But for instance, you can wear a pigskin skirt. There's nothing wrong with that. You can play football with a pigskin. You can have a wallet made out of pigskin. Don't any of us have like alligator or something? Alligator shoes, alligator purse? Those aren't kosher. How about a leather skirt or shoes made out of leather? Those are most likely not kosher. But we do it, right? Because there's nothing really wrong with that. Because you're not eating it. If you're eating it, then it's 100%. So what he's saying is that there is also such a concept. Where we can't get confused is by equating not having a dog and cat to not eating kosher, to eating unkosher. Those are not the same. One is a custom, an idea, a nice thing, but the other one is the law. We can't confuse the two. Right? That's very important. Like for someone to say, I won't have a dog or cat because it can have a bad effect on my soul, according to the Kabbalah, but they don't keep kosher. So that's like that. There's a confusion. That's where something's wrong.
So nothing wrong with cats and dogs.
No, there's what he says. What that person says has a basis in the Kabbalah. There's a custom that some people don't interact with non-kosher animals, like they having a pet or having a toy that's representative of that, or a stuffed animal. But it's not a law. Right? It's not forbidden to do. It's just Somebody thought of this, and the Kabbalah talks about it, and therefore they follow it. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. But you certainly can't tell somebody they have to do that unless that's part of the subgroup, like by some Hasidim. That's how they are. So if you're part of that Hasidic group, then you would do that.
Okay.
Right? Yes.
Thank you so much.
So, you say, that it has to chew its cud and have like a split hoof, right? So what is it? There's cow. What can we eat? Cow and sheep.
Cows, sheep, goats,
Goats?
deer. There are many animals that we can eat. But
There are.
Well, at least.
But you can't. I mean, you go to Stovies. There's just.
that's because most people eat beef. Kosher and not kosher. People eat beef, right? You walk into a non-kosher one, most people buy beef.
But there's really just. I mean, they sell cow and sometimes sheep or lamb, right?
Right.
I see that. That's it, right?
No, you could have goat. You could have, which
Is it goat?
depending on your culture. If you lived in Morocco, you can walk into a store, you can buy kosher
No.
goat.
That's it. Like goat and deer. That's it. Like 4.
No, there's others. That just doesn't come to mind now.
They're pretty rare things.
But even the ones who aren't kosher are pretty rare. How many of them can you eat? I mean, a lion, a tiger, a bear. Okay, you can't eat those. Are you going to? Even the non-Jews in general don't eat those,
Sure.
right? So it's really among the animals that you can eat that are normal to eat. If you go to a country that has no Jews, right? Go to some place that there's no Jewish people, they're also going to eat. Most of the animals are going to be the animals that we eat, right? So it's not a
So there's
keeping kosher.
too, right?
Keeping kosher is really not that hard a thing. It's more hard in our brains than it is in reality, especially if you live in a place like this where we are, where it's like you have to go out of your way. If you live in this neighborhood, you have to go out of your way to buy unkosher meat, right? To cook, you really do.
Yeah.
Now, if you to keep kosher here is a very simple thing. When a Jew doesn't keep kosher here, it's by choice, and it's not because of necessity. In small towns, I can understand that it's more difficult. But in a big city like this, where you have such a high percentage of observant Jews, so that the stores that have the most kosher food are more successful than the ones that don't, right? Like you talk to anybody in business,
Well,
anywhere in the world.
It's got kosher food, chicken and
Mhm.
snacks.
You go to anywhere in the world where there's business, retail business. Saturday is the biggest business day, right? Everywhere. Everyone knows Saturday is your big day for sales. You want to go to a mall, Saturday the mall is the most packed, right? But go to Sobeys here. Go into that parking lot of Sobeys on a Saturday. Like people cut through to walk to shul. There's nobody there. There's not that there's no stores open. There are a couple open, but there's nobody there. Same thing with at Chabad Gate. There's nobody there.
Yeah.
The busiest day. Why? Because we live in a place where there is such a high percentage of observant Jews that it changes all the rules.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's say to not use kosher products takes effort. To eat kosher, I understand. There you have to not have milk and meat, and you have to have pots and pans and everything. So I understand that it might be a little bit more involved for a person. But if somebody has no interest in keeping kosher, they really have to go out of their way to not have kosher
And
ingredients.
what about sushi? Sushi are just fish.
Well, it depends. This first thing, a lot of sushi is made with unkosher fish. Not all fish is kosher. And the preparation is really the issue. Right? The sushi is rice, seaweed, and fish, right? That's basically what sushi is. So therefore, rice, that's kosher. Seaweed is kosher, and fish, for the most part, is kosher. But not all, in every case. Rice cooked in an unkosher pot is not kosher. Seaweed that hasn't been checked for bugs is not kosher. And fish that don't have fins and gills are not kosher. So there are ways of having it. If you walk into a non-kosher restaurant and you order sushi, it will not be kosher. Right? Yeah, but it's easy to have kosher because much of sushi is, and it's like I said, the ingredients in sushi are all things that can be
Go
kosher.
to Chabad Gate.
Yeah, I saw many sushi kosher.
Right? So I'll just finish off with one thought because we're already past our time. So this now, the rest of this parsha goes through all different rules of keeping kosher. And it ends on 606, just right before the ending. It gives you a rationale. as to why. And it says, Kini Hashem Elokeichem, because I'm the Lord your God, but he's Kadeshtem, and he says, and you will make yourself holy. V'ayisim Kadoshim, you will become holy. Ki Kadosh Ani, because I am holy. Below Titmas Nososechem, and you will not make unclean your souls. B'chol Sheretz Haromas, by eating all of these disgusting things. The point being is that that's a sheretz is a disgusting thing. That's a bug. In this point, he's talking about those types of animals. He doesn't mean all unkosher food is disgusting. He's talking about disgusting ones. And then he says, Ani Hashem Hamayil Eschem Eretz Mitzrayim, I am the God who rose you up by taking you out of Egypt. Liosechem Elokim, to be your God. Vayisim Kadoshim, and you will be holy. Ki Kadosh Ani, because I am holy. So what he's telling you here is that the laws of kosher are an example of holiness.